According to EgyptianMuseum.org, cats were very important to the ancient Egyptians and were even considered to be demi-deities. Not only did they protect the crops and slow the spread of disease by killing rodents, they were also thought to be the physical form of the goddess Bastet. Bastet was the goddess of protection, pleasure, and the bringer of good health. She had the head of a cat and a slender female body. Bastet was the daughter of Ra, sister of Sekhmet, the wife of Ptah, and the mother of Mihos. Since this second dynasty, Bastet was worshipped as a deity, most commonly in Lower Egypt. Her form and powers have changed over the years. It was believed that every day she would ride through the sky with her father, the sun god, Ra. As his boat pulled the sun through the sky, she would watch over and protect him. At night, she would turn into a cat to protect Ra from his greatest enemy, the serpent Apep. Due to her protective duties, she was nicknamed the Lady of the East, goddess of the rising sun, and the sacred and all-seeing eye. She is also known as the goddess of the moon and was thought to be the eye of the moon and the eye of Ra. Bastet is still worshipped today, and her protection is believed by some to be cast over modern cats. The influence that gods and deities had on ancient civilizations cannot be underestimated. Cults existed in ancient Egypt in many different forms, and that influence has not waned in this age. New Age spiritualism and secret societies take so much influence from Egyptian teachings and beliefs, and the goddess Bastet is not excluded from those influences. Not only are there historical versions of human sacrifice and tithing within the translations of hieroglyphics found in recovered remains of the ancient civilizations, ucl.ac.uk also tells us, in ancient Egypt, every day in every temple, specially designated persons performed a ritual focused on making offerings of food, drink, clothing, and ointment to a divine being, deity, king, or blessed dead, made accessible in the form of images. Through this ritual, the ancient Egyptians sought to maintain the fabric and process of the universe. According to their own writings, the ancient Egyptians did not worship idols. They did not consider the images themselves to be divine forces. Rather, the image provided a visible and tangible form in which the offerings and service of human beings could be channeled to the divine forces. In order to make an inanimate item into a possible channel for offerings, it had to be consecrated by the ritual of opening the mouth. Again, these ideas and influences are not lost today. We see them in the makeup of groups like the Rosicrucians, the Order of the Solar Temple, the Source family, and major modern religions. Most groups can be traced back to having some teachings, beliefs, or practices that were also a part of ancient Egypt's daily worship. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series. For this instalment, I am chatting with Desi, who offers us a story of two halves. The first half is based around a group known as Freedom Fire Ministries. The second is about an organisation that positions itself as a cat rescue non-profit known as Eva's Eden. But behind the doors of this outwardly wholesome organisation comes something a little bit darker. Don't let a punny episode title take away from the destruction and severity of Desi's experiences and stories. The cat cult may be infamous in certain online spaces, but the damage inflicted by organisations cannot be underestimated. A massive thank you and welcome to Penny and Eleanor, the two newest patrons of the Cult Vault podcast. This work wouldn't be possible without the support from donors, and it really goes a long way. I hope that you enjoy access to exclusive content. To support the show from as little as £1 a month, you can find me at patreon.com/The Cult Vault. But for now, here is Desi. So hello, Desi, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today as a long-time listener and supporter of the show. We're going to be discussing something new on the podcast this week. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hi, everybody. I'm Desi. My pronouns are they, them, and I live in Bellingham, Washington.
Have you always been in Washington, or have you lived in various different parts of America?
For the most part, I've always been up here. I did have a year where I went to Job Corps in Astoria, Oregon, but got booted back here.
And the group that we're going to be talking about today, it's been known by many different names. So I wondered if you could just reel a few of them off for us.
For sure. So when I started going, it was called what it originally was called, which was Freedom Fire Ministries. And then around like 2005, they changed their name to Moriah Ministries, like Mount Moriah, where Abraham took Isaac. And then I'm pretty sure it was after I left is when they officially changed their name to the Oneness Foundation. Um, and that was about the same time that they started their cat adoption agency, Eva's Eden.
So there's a lot of moving parts with this particular story, and there's almost sort of a group within a group that or a public facing group, and then something a bit different and perhaps more secretive happening
Mm-hmm.
behind the other group. So this is something that I've seen people speak about on Reddit, for example. There's been a lot of online interest around this group. And when you emailed me to tell me that this was the group that you've had personal experience with, I was really intrigued into how everything came to be. And so today we will learn all about that from our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the best place to start is to ask you if you can give us a history of the Oneness Foundation, and that will lead us nicely into discussing how Eva's Eden came to be.
For sure. So the pastor is a woman named Cheryl Ruthven. She's gone by several names. That's the one that um, I'm most recently aware of. When I met her, she was going by Cheryl Walker, which was her married name, but she had already been divorced by then. And then I actually don't know if she ever took on officially any of the names of any of the people she married after that. But uh, she started Freedom Fire Ministries like really early in the 2000s. She broke away from a church called Gates of Praise, which was very like a mix of like evangelical and Pentecostal. Um, but from my understanding, I never went there, but it seemed like just a very intense church, but you know, not anything too weird. I mean, that's all relative, right? But um, and then yeah, so um there was a lot of the name changes, and it kind of reflects a lot of what was going on when the names changed. When I started going, it was still called Freedom Fire Ministries. Um, and they were doing a lot of like, they were incorporating a lot of Jewish customs and celebrating a lot of Jewish holidays, even though no one in the entire church was Jewish. I'm sure maybe someone had it like in their ancestry or something, but like, yeah, no one was Jewish. And part of that is we also stopped celebrating Christmas and Easter because there was like, you know, the pagan origins, which is funny because later on they started bringing pagan stuff in. So it'll make a lot of sense that none of it makes sense. um, and then, yeah, around 2005, they changed their name to Moriah Ministries. Um, and they started, um, the way I put it, they kind of started hating on the Freemasons. I think it just had a lot to do with like almost we were promised all these heavenly treasures. And so like all the stuff that we've kind of learned, from National Treasure and Da Vinci Code about like the Knights Templar and all that. So like basically we were supposed to have all those things, but what they really were was like secret knowledge and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, they bought a Masonic temple in Blaine, to kind of, quote unquote, take back territory the enemy had stolen. And um, they they moved up there, and that was right around the time that I got out. Um, and when they moved up there is when they changed their name and started Eva's Eden. And Eva's Eden was like in the basement of that building. And they incorporated so many different things, and it's hard to, it all kind of flowed together in a, because like it made sense at the time, right? Because around the time the info with the Freemasons, she also brought in a lot of, and that's, she brought it in. she she purported herself as a prophet. That was the big thing. And so, and with that, because she was the one hearing from God, all of the knowledge that she was bringing in um, was from God. And also, we couldn't research it because it would show that we didn't trust her or trust God. And so she started bringing in like Eastern influences, like Tai Chi and Buddhist meditation. And we learned about like chakras and the different healing crystals you could put on each of the chakras. Um, and then when, after I got out, they started bringing in more like more pagan influences. Um, and for a minute, they believed in the Mayan calendar. Um, and Eva's Eden is related, one, to Egyptian mythology with worshiping cats. And actually, the cat on the Eva's Eden like sign is Bastet, the cat goddess. And but also they would ferry the souls of the 144,000 in the end times, and so they were supposed to be revered, all that stuff. Um, and then uh, they planned it for probably about a year, but and they changed places several times. But in 2013, spring of 2013, pretty much everybody from the church moved to Tennessee. There's maybe a handful of people that are still here. Um, and at that time, they were told to tell everybody that they were leaving behind, including me, that the church disbanded and that Cheryl had moved to Scotland. Um, I think I remember something that she was like writing or something. Um, but, and so of course, by this time, I got out before they even left, but like, for some reason, I've never been sure why, but my parents still talk to me. Like, I mean, not sure. I know that, they love me and whatever, but like we were told from day one that if anybody speaks against the church or like questions why you're in it, then basically cut them out. Um, and so in that one way, I've always been a little like, are you guys actually kind of rebellious? Um, but I know quite a lot, not so much, when they moved, my parents, maintain that nothing happens. But I have some friends that got out after they moved over there. Um, One of them, my friend Rachel, she said it's okay for me to mention her, but she's been on a couple podcasts. She's been on Life After God, and then she let me know about The Opportunist, and she was on that. And then I also talked to them in 2021.
This matriarch female group leader. Typically, with groups changing names, it's a rebranding tactic to leave behind allegations or smear campaigns, or uh, to disguise themselves from any negative press that they may have received. And usually it's warranted negative press, of course. Is that the case here, or is Cheryl Walker just erratic in nature?
I think I definitely think that there was some trying to just dodge, I'm sure taxes was part of it and stuff like that. Because what's interesting is like they changed names, but they only moved once as far as while they were here. Um, so the Freedom Fire and the Mariah were both, um, in one location. Um, and I recall that like, because again, she purported herself as a prophet, and so it definitely had to do with whatever she was prophesying at the time. Because a lot of her prophecies and a lot of the stuff she brought in and the stuff that she changed, including the names and stuff, had to do with um like what she was saying God's relationship was to us as the church. Um, both like the church as a whole and then us as the church, the chosen ones. Um, and so um the I kind of, looking back, I can see that the Mariah ministry time was, and I'll talk about this again later, but I really think that like she had a longer game plan than a lot of people initially thought. Um, and so like I think the Mariah ministry was kind of like the stepping stone between Freedom Fire and Oneness. Because and especially like when you think about what Mount Moriah was, it was like a testing of Abraham to see if he would kill Isaac, and then so you know both trying but also not trying to get into her head, you know what I mean? So
When you mentioned that the new teachings or the new beliefs that Cheryl would bring in, and it made sense at the time, it's a more of a gradual thing when it happens in real time. Of course, when we're looking at it on a chronological timeline,
mm-hmm,
and we're saying, and then this came in, and this came in, and this came in. It sounds very sporadic, but
mm-hmm,
I imagine living those experiences where subtle changes are coming in over periods of time, months or
mm-hmm,
years, then it's not as drastic um as it sounds just kind of talking through it. And
yeah.
I wonder how you and your family became involved with Freedom Fire Ministries.
So one thing that's kind of funny is from listening to your podcast, um, I came to realize that I've always, well, until I got out of that one, I've always been in a cult, because I grew up in the Assemblies of God churches. Um, we went to Ferndale Assembly of God, which is now called Wacom New Life Assembly. Um, I technically wasn't born there. My mom and my dad um, got married when I was 1.5. Um, I call him my dad. He raised me. He adopted me when I was 3. Um, but yeah, he's not my biological dad. Um, But yeah, they were already going there like as soon as she got together with him. And so we were kind of already primed, Assemblies of God is definitely Pentecostal evangelical. I uh I for a long time didn't know a whole lot of the terms, or like, it was very hard for me sometimes to differentiate like what exactly is different between some of these. Because I also can kind of see some like Baptist leaning in Assemblies of God too. Um, but um my parents, um I'm like third generation Whatcom County resident here. And so my parents had lots of friends and their parents had lots of friends. And so some of their high school friends were going to Freedom Fire and they just invited them because they were still in the stage where they were inviting new people, definitely like the, trying to grow a membership phase. Um, and we went, I was 12 years old and we were we were sitting in like the either second or third row, and what she liked to do when there was new people is she would give little prophecies like you can have a prophecy as a treat. And so she gave my parents like a blank or a dual prophecy, like a prophecy for both of them. And I don't really remember it. I'm sure it had something to do with like y'all are good together or whatever. Um, but then she prophesied over me, and I'm this chubby little 12-year-old girl sitting next to her obviously domineering father, and she tells me that God is telling me that um, I will always be your Abba Father. I'll be there when no one else is, like everyone else has turned their face away from you. um I've seen you be stabbed in the back and I'm here to dress your wounds. Like I remember like whole and yeah, she sees me and like, you know she was really good at cold reading people, and she had gone to school for psychology. um and also I'm sure, especially like my parents friends probably told her a little something, but it's not too hard to tell that, again, chubby 12-year-old girl sitting next to a domineering father probably has friend issues, probably has daddy issues, you know and so, but I just felt so seen and so like, oh my god, like God actually knows, you know like what they say in Sunday school is real. And so I was hooked, and it was just supposed to be a visit, and I begged my parents to go back.
So your family have always had ties to Christian religion.
Well, so like my mom and dad, um, my dad grew up Catholic, um, and like my grandma's or was relatively devout. She's actually um become quite liberal in the last like 10 years or so. Um, but he wasn't like he wasn't super devout in anything. Um, but when I was growing up, that's a lot of what I saw. We were very um, committed members of the church, both in the Assemblies of God and this one. That my parents were definitely very like, you know, eager to please and eager to like, do what needed to be done and like fill the slots and stuff. Like they were always really big in the Assemblies of God church of doing the coffee hour after the service and stuff like that. Um, both at Assemblies of God and then at Freedom Fire. My dad was a Royal Ranger commander, and my mom did some of the different missionettes. I think most of the time she worked with rainbows. Um, I was an honor star. But and so he kind of tried to do some of the similar things later on at Freedom Fire. I don't remember what he ended up calling the group, but he led like a group of like teenage boys there too. Um, but I think this is something that I might have shared in my like questionnaire thing, but um, I've like always had it in my head that like the church with Cheryl specifically, but I think I can kind of see it in a lot of churches, is that it was like a beehive. Um, and she was definitely the queen bee. And then she had like her like inner circle, like her right hand woman, right hand man, all that stuff. And they were like the drones, like the um kind of protecting her. And then everybody else was worker bees. And you know, like they're just there to make everything go smoothly, to fund her. I'm sure was a, even though she was always rich to begin with, she got so much money from her divorce with her husband. Um, and but also just kind of not expendable so much, but just like, you know, it wouldn't matter if you were there or not, essentially. Um, so she just needed people to follow her and basically worship her. So
So you go as a 12-year-old, you have this prophecy handed to you by Cheryl, and you ask your parents, please, can we go back? What does your commitment to Freedom Fire Ministries look like from that point onwards? Is there sort of a typical schedule that the church would stick to? And what did the day-to-day interactions with services and stuff look like?
so yeah, it was almost like my parents gave their um resignation at a job to the Assemblies of God Church, kind of like there was a slight transition period, and then we started going to Freedom Fire, and I mean it was basically full bore from day one. um I personally, as a preteen teenager, didn't have a whole lot that I was expected to do except for basically listen to my parents and go wherever they went, which was initially it was a typical, Sunday service schedule. Um, and then usually I believe it was a Wednesday, you know, either sort of like prayer or Bible study type thing. Um, but things quickly changed and they never stopped changing. Um, which is that one of the things I already mentioned is that they started really incorporating a lot of Jewish beliefs. So a lot more stuff happened on Saturdays instead of Sundays. Um, and also then we would do Friday night stuff because they would want to do a Shabbat. Um, and then, yeah, things varied and they would stay for, a couple months or so. But a lot of times they would start adding things, and especially like, oh, we have a prayer meeting tonight, like something important, Cheryl has something that God needs to tell us and it can't wait. Um, and especially when there was some pretty intense things over the years that like it was like you need to be a witness to this now. Um, so as far as like our day to day, like it was still like you can have your job and your kids can go to school, but like sort of be in the world but not of the world type of thing. Um, and it was, for me, it was really hard um, being in school during that time, especially because also we were in the process of moving right around that time too. Still in the same county, but I had to move schools. And but even before that, like, I told all my friends about this cool new church I was going to, and I was already a weird kid, and everybody thought I was even weirder after that. Um, and so yeah, and so I was kind of hopeful going to a new church, new school, and actually kind of didn't talk as much about it until like I kind of sussed some people out. Um, and also the school that I moved to was like I went from uh, a very large school district, and all of the schools were pretty big. And then when they all funneled into the high school was like, what was it, like 1,500 students or something like that. And then the school that I moved to, the high school was a total of 500 people or so. Like my graduating class had 90 something people in it. And so, everybody had been together since kindergarten, and it was very hard to. So actually, that kind of engendered me a little bit to the other kids that were in the church, somewhat. Again, I was a weird kid, so like I got along better with adults. Um, like teachers, I was always friends with my teachers, and then yeah, I was friends with a lot of the adults at the church. My sister's almost 7 years younger than me, and so again, a lot of those people that invited us to the church, like, they would hang out with my family, and so I already knew them and like talked to them. I was a very gifted child, so I was able to hold pretty good conversations with adults at a young age. And I think that actually is ultimately something that helped me figure out getting out later on.
Technically, it sounds pretty standard at this point for a church that exists. I mean, perhaps not typical in the sense that it's a female-led ministry. That in
Mm-hmm.
itself, in some parts of America specifically, might be very strange.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's Sunday services. There's kids there. Everybody gets together. It's a pretty standard time. How does how do things begin to change internally? We've established that there's name changes. We've established that there are different beliefs brought in at certain times. But you are at a pinnacle age of development, and you're now being integrated into a new church, a new school. So I wonder how all the pieces fit together for you personally in terms of how things change over time.
Mm-hmm. Um, One of the things that happened pretty early on, um, and that, when I started figuring out getting out and like researched uh I forgot what like the more I guess PC term for it is now, but um instead of the C word, like
Oh,
what you
like new religious movements
thank
or
you.
high
Yes,
demand religious groups. Yeah.
thank you. Yes.
I mean, you
So when
can
I
call your group a cult. That's absolutely fine. I
okay,
think that's
I
props
just
to
I
you
wanna
if you wanna say that.
okay, I just wanna clarify. Um, but yeah, so I started researching cults, especially like at the behest of some adults in my life, my stepmom and the librarian at my high school. But one of the things that I found was love bombing, which is something that happened to me pretty early on my 13th birthday. Again, no one was Jewish. They had no right to do this, but they threw me a bat mitzvah, and complete with giving me a tallit, a prayer shawl that someone had made and like put um the Hebrew symbol for Anna, because that was something that God called me in some of my later prophecies, um, and said, because Anna in the Bible, um, like danced for God, and so that was what I was supposed to do, apparently. And if they could see me in the club now, um, but so and it was things like that, and uh but also, so I was struggling with school, trying to get to know people, trying to figure out if they'd be okay with finding out that I go to that church. um I had already come out as bisexual, like right around the time that we started going to Freedom Fire. And I think for a while my parents just kind of wrote it off as it's just a phase or whatever. Um, but like that was one of the first things I kind of led with when I got to my new school. And also um a couple of the friends that I made um were, you know, obviously very newly into it because we're all, preteens, teenagers. But um, one specific friend was into Wicca. And so I borrowed some of her books and would go over, and we did like we sent a candle down the little creek behind her apartment and stuff. And my parents found out about that. They found the books in my room. And then, so yeah, that and being bi, and some other stuff. Like I experimented with weed one time, and my dad found the remnants of that. When we moved from one house and then an apartment for a year and then another house. And when we moved into that house, by that time, kind of aside from all of the like going to church and stuff, like me personally, I was having a lot of behavioral issues, due to a lot of um, just different kinds of abuse, and also a lot of mental health issues that I never fully got help for, until later on in life. My mom tried to get me some help, um, but also the people that I ended up seeing misdiagnosed me. And so, all that is to say, when we moved to my new house, they made me live in a travel trailer on the edge of our property, and like locked me out of the house and stuff. And so, and I think I've thought about it a lot, and I've talked to some of my therapists, and I really do think that that was an idea that my dad got from Cheryl. Um, and so they found all that stuff in the trailer, and they took me to Cheryl basically to have me exercise. Like she didn't do it in the, Latin throwing holy water on you, whatever, like the exorcist. But she she did similar to what she would do a lot in our services, which again, like when we first started going, we're pretty, I mean, I I've been to other churches since, and like nobody else prophesize at new people. And but she like she would put oil on her hand, and it's usually like, like a olive oil or some other base, and then some fragrance and stuff, but it was anointing oil. And she'd put it on her hand, put it on your forehead, and pray over you. And at first, I think it was kind of like everybody just learned that it was just what you were supposed to do. And then at some point, like your mind and body just like actually thought that it was what you were feeling, which is that you're supposed to get slain in the spirit, you're supposed to get thrown back, and you're supposed to like start crying. Um, and so all that stuff happened, and they thought that, I was fixed. But lo and behold, um, and so, and that was one of the things in one of the services. Um, there was all the gifts of the spirit were plentiful. Like, she was the only prophet, although there were a couple people randomly throughout the years that would stand up and give a prophecy, but it always ended up supporting either what she was saying, or like basically spilling someone's secrets just kind of out of nowhere. um and but there was also speaking in tongues was a big one. And um the way that it seemed a lot of people ended up getting it, and again kind of speaks to me to what I said earlier about she kind of had a long game, which includes like, I got into Wicca back then, I'm pagan now. I believe in like, you know, some kind of energy. I don't really know, but like I know that there's other stuff out there. And I think that she figured some of that stuff out and was using it to just be nefarious. I don't personally feel that there's like the light and dark and good and bad and stuff like that. I think it's like you tap into stuff that most other people can't, and then use it for your own stuff, and which can be good or bad. And I think she was doing that. And so with that, she basically gave people tongues. And like she put her hand on my throat, and like she started saying it, and she was like, repeat it after me. And then I was finally able to do it. And throughout the years, it morphed, it sounded different. It always sounded like gibberish. Because like, especially when she was in her different eras of what she was bringing in, um hers and then kind of everybody else's, surprise surprise, would start to sound either kind of more like an Asian language. At one point we were really into watching the Passion of the Christ, and so some of it sounded like the Aramaic, and stuff like that. I wasn't there when they started incorporating more of the like Celtic stuff, but I'm sure some of it started sounding more Celtic or Welsh or whatever, which you would probably be able to speak more to. And that was all just like in a couple of years. And then when it was the summer before high school, um, I went and visited my biological dad. And while I was there, his wife, Jeannie, um, I was just, waxing poetic about the church, and was still pretty much in love with it at the time. And she's like, that sounds super weird. And she even took me to like a legit Southern Baptist church, but not like Westboro Baptist, but like, like just, and she was like, this is what, to her, this is what it's supposed to look like. And that is not what your church sounds like. Um, and so she just encouraged me to just kind of start asking questions, maybe not like outright, but like trying to kind of observe also during that time, she uh, encouraged me to call CPS about the trailer thing, specifically because when I was visiting, it was the summertime, but the winter before, my heater had broke, and I was using a space heater, so I was fine, but still, like, just the conditions were never okay to begin with. Nobody should be put in a friggin' travel trailer at 12
No.
years old. But when I called, first of all, I said I'm calling for a friend. And then also they're like, it's the summer, you don't need a heater. And that was basically it. Um, and I just, I already like didn't want to do it to begin with. So when I was defeated by that, I was like, okay. Um, and I've always been like a people pleaser and like, um, just one, just because of the abuse and neglect, um, and just the things that happen to a lot of people, even as those things aside, but just in a conservative home. Um, I just, any chance I could to like make them happy. So I went back and like kept trying to go for a while, but also at war with like what I was seeing and like what I was feeling of like, this isn't right. Um, and when I started going to high school, I quickly became friends with my high school librarian, and she started suggesting, Google these things, and she suggested that I write a memoir. I might at some point, but also it's one of those things, I'm sure other people have said, like, um because of the abuse and the mental health issues, like there's huge chunks of my childhood and even up in some of my 20s that I don't remember. And so like the stuff that like I do remember, I've like sat and been like, did this actually happen, and did it happen the way I thought it did? you know and so that's why it's been nice, the last like, since like 2016, when I learned about Rachel telling her story, and then the other podcast and some of the other stuff that's come out, um, just getting stuff reinforced that like I wasn't making that stuff up, because for a long time I definitely felt pretty alone. Because when they moved in 2013, I was completely alone. Like I have some like other family around here, but at that time I was undiagnosed bipolar, so I was like, all kinds of wilding out. And then with that, I also uh, was in pretty hard throes of addiction. Um, uh, this last week was 6 years since I've been in recovery. Um, thanks. Uh, I did have a little blip last year, um, but and that was because my parents told me they weren't coming to my wedding when I was marrying uh, another AFAB person. Um, but yeah, it was hard for a lot of my teenage years, because yeah, I I really wanted to believe, you know. Um, I especially just because like, if nothing else, like, I remember at one point thinking like along the lines of like, I just wish that I could like believe and do this stuff, just because it would just make everything so much easier. um, but I'm a Sagittarius. I don't do anything the easy way.
Well, interestingly, yesterday I had a conversation with an author named Molly Salons, and we were discussing her initial introduction to the group that she became a part of. And Molly, in her mind, felt like she needed a purpose in life, and that if she was able to find a husband and have kids, that would solve her bouts of depression and her seeking something more in life. And
Mm-hmm.
when she was introduced to the group, she found a whole group of really loving, love bombing, we realize now, really loving, interested, attractive, well-groomed men with no rings on their fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Which she later realized that they were all married, but they were told for that exact purpose not to wear their rings. Um, and she said that it was such a life-changing experience in that moment in her life that she was instantly hooked. And we talked a little bit about that hook, and she said, "Isn't it strange that that's all it took?" And then we realized not really, because a lot of her time then spent in the group was seeking that initial euphoric feeling that she
Mm-hmm.
had when she first joined the group. And the prophecy that you received from Cheryl
Mm-hmm.
that really spoke to you and made you feel the way that you did,
Mm-hmm.
so much so you're able to remember even today exactly what she said. um it's that same type of thing, isn't it? It's I want to believe that God
Yeah.
knows me, that God
Mm-hmm.
watches over me and
Yep.
understands how I think and feel. Of
Right.
course,
Yeah.
who wouldn't want that?
Mm-hmm.
So we go from kind of a standard church gathering to something a bit stranger, and then the
Mm-hmm.
abusive practices start coming in. There's a
Yeah.
possibility that Cheryl is talking into your parents' ears about
Mm-hmm.
ways to discipline their child.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what you explained in terms of a little bit of a little bit of boundary pushing, risk taking, typical teenage behavior in terms of experimenting with marijuana. I mean, I say this so casually now. I imagine that when my children start to take part in risk taking behavior,
Yeah.
it will be a whole different thing. But at the time you're talking to me about this, I'm thinking about me as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and instead of the mobile home, the trailer situation, which is just absolutely shocking. If Cheryl would have been a judge or an educational consultant or a psychologist, it could have been a troubled teen facility that you were placed in instead of a trailer.
Yeah.
For that same reasoning, the experimenting with drugs, the books, the questionable books that they found in your
Mm-hmm.
bedroom, and
Yeah.
then uh your outness as a bisexual individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, in terms of the church itself, how was the LGBT community received?
Yeah. No, it definitely wasn't like speaking to like, man shall only lie with woman type thing was never on the forefront of their priorities, but it was definitely not accepted. Um, actually, I don't know a whole lot of other people besides Rachel and Mary, their sisters, that both got out after they moved over there. But I do know that Mary came out as queer as well. And so, yeah, but she felt that she had to hide it. And also, she started there as an adult. Um, so um, there was, yeah, it wasn't talked about, but the little that it was not okay. Um, so I didn't have a whole lot of support. And actually, going back to the troubled teen industry for a minute, I never went to like an actual facility like that, but there was one time um, where like there was an argument between me and my parents, and they called the cops on me, and I got taken to, I think it was called Birch Bay House, but it was basically like a small short-term version of that, where it was basically like, we can't deal with you, go to this place for, a weekend or whatever. And it was that time and one other time where I like went and spent like a weekend or so with this family, that I guess was kind of conscripted to do that with a lot of other troubled teens. And there was actually another girl living there at the time. That was actually how I first heard Eminem. She put it on in the car. So, um, but yeah, so yeah, um, I don't really ever recall like it being a threat on the table, sort of like, military school type threat or whatever. But I do remember from time to time hearing about the different programs, either like from my mom or my mom's friends or like someone, because I remember even hearing about it before we started going to Freedom Fire, when we were still going to the Assemblies of God church. It was called, I remember there was a brochure and it was like a lavender color, but that was about it. Yeah, it definitely wasn't like a big, you know, um, stand outside something with a picket thing, or anything like that. But um, yeah, it's not like if I had stayed in the church, I could have dated a woman and gotten married by the pastor type of thing, you know. So
And at some point, Cheryl starts introducing some other questionable beliefs, in terms of the National Treasure films, and
yeah,
which
yeah.
which is,
So
it's just interesting for me reading your emails back to me, because
mhm.
I absolutely love treasure hunt films. I
Yeah,
could watch them all day. I love
but it's
the idea of going on a treasure hunt, finding all the
right.
treasure. And
It's the underlying conspiracy theories is what they were obsessed with.
that's the thing. That's the key thing. So when you were talking to me about the Da Vinci Code and about the National Treasure films and the links between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar, I do find that interesting. I don't know how much credence there is to it, considering that there is so much make-believe material based on those potentially hidden secrets.
Hmm.
Um, but what I couldn't help but think in my mind when you were talking about Cheryl moving everybody to this Masonic temple is her trying all the tiles in the floor and all of the, like all the light switches and stuff, just to see if anything moves in the
Just in case,
building.
are there any hidden passageways?
So my vision is Cheryl on her hands and knees, kind of trying all the tiles on the floor and the floorboards, and just, yeah, just hoping that her idea of the truth is, hidden in
Right.
that building.
Well, and that,
So
yeah, if she had found something like that, you better believe that she'd use it in the service of like, dramatically. Because what she would do with a lot of prophecies is either during or another day, she would like bring it back or like have another prophecy that kind of elaborated on another one. And she would do prophetic acts, which was basically like acting out or pantomiming um some aspect of the prophecy, or like just driving it home in a certain way. Um, like there was one time, and I don't remember like the substance of any of them, what it would be regarding. Um, but there was one time where she like smashed a vase full of water. And most of these, I only ever went to the Masonic temple once. I had for the most part gotten out prior to the move. So all of these things happened in this tiny little sanctuary, where they rented basically like an office space. Um, and but they had like the upstairs and the downstairs. And so the sanctuary was literally, I mean, you can't see my apartment, but it's, it's probably twice the size of this. It's really not that big. Um, and so like she's in the front of the room smashing like a huge vase of water, and just water and shards of glass flying everywhere. Um, there's another time, and it was more than once, um, because also like I sent you a bunch of the links, and I was, rereading some of them and re-listening in the, weeks and tonight leading up to this. Um, But one thing that I read, and I remember it differently, is that they said she pricked her finger and dripped it into a goblet of juice. And I distinctly remember one time where she actually slit her wrist. Like not just pricked her finger, but full on like, and I think there was something to do with like she like specifically said something about she was using an athame, a ritual dagger from pagan rites. Um, and but I'm pretty sure that was like a one-time thing. You can't really keep doing that. It's probably not very good for you. Um,
So you expecting everybody to drink from this goblet?
mhm. Everybody
Oh,
did. Yeah. So, um, and like speaking of my parents, like just kind of doing whatever they were told, um, we had raised, we lived on a farm by that time, and so we had raised all kinds of animals. And we had raised, I can't remember if it was a goat or a lamb, but
oh no.
and we like had to, my dad slaughtered it and cooked it over like this big pit, and then we all had to eat it at the, which is also kind of funny because another belief that they started doing a couple years later was they're all vegetarian now. Um, so, and I was never really sure. I think there was an element of like, like save the animals type of thing, but also it had to do a little bit with like trying to eat the way they used to eat. Like what was the it was a specific like band of people back in the Bible days. It started with an E, but I can't remember what it is. Um and yeah, it was all more convoluted stuff, trying to, and definitely trying to like exert some control.
Would it be
um
Enoch's?
I think it might have been, actually, yeah.
I thought that maybe it would be sort of maybe a kosher diet influence, but it's strictly vegetarianism.
Hmm. Yeah.
So Cheryl starts bringing in influences of esotericism, New Age spirituality,
Hmm.
Egyptology, talking
Hmm.
about how things that were taken by secret societies and hidden movements in history, actually all that stuff belonged to Cheryl and her followers, which is just
Hmm.
really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, but also on top of that, you've still got the religious aspects, and she is bringing in influences from different pantheons, Mayan influences, Celtic influences. It's
Hmm.
kind of like at this point she is reading different things from different belief systems, and kind of picking and choosing what she thinks
Mhm.
might fit her particular style of preaching.
Part of it is some of that stuff, especially like the actual like pantheons and stuff like that, came more after I wasn't really in it anymore. But again, was still it was before they moved, so my parents were still talking to me a little bit. Um, but again, it's just very, yeah, she would bring in the info, but we couldn't go research it. Um, and what's really funny is like some of it was like I already knew this from something else. And so, especially after I got out, I like try to be like, you do realize that this is this, and they're like, oh no, but it's but yeah, for a while, everything was still under the blood of Jesus Christ, under the anointing of Jesus Christ. Um, but after a while, they weren't saying that as much. I think maybe they hoped that it was implied.
It's so interesting. You could just imagine her watching the Da Vinci Code and being like, ah, this is what we're going to put in next week. But we're
Yeah,
going to tell people that they're not allowed to research it, because then they'll find out that I took it from a Dan Brown book or film.
yeah. Well, no, like we watched the Da Vinci Code in church, and yeah, she like was able to somehow explain away that like, you know, I know that this seems fictionalized, but here's how it actually like, yeah.
Wow.
So, but I was just thinking about like talking about the anointing of Jesus and being slain in the spirit and stuff like that that I talked about earlier, and it made me think about another element um that I, had written about earlier. Um and it like that kind of goes into some of the like the inner workings that a lot of us weren't fully privy to, like the actual underpinnings, even though we saw some of it publicly. Um, but again, she's the queen bee. She had her inner circle, and one of them, her name was Maureen. Um, and Cheryl one day, and to me, it was seemingly kind of out of the blue, um, called her out as the angel of light, which um, I don't know if she actually pointed us somewhere in the Bible or not to where we were able to find the explanation, but essentially the angel of light is a being that comes to make you think that you're in the presence of Jesus, but it's all an illusion. It's basically like a demon or something like that. And so she called her that and threw her out. But Maureen also had a husband and three children still in the church. And she gave Pete, the husband, the ultimatum of divorce her and you can stay in the church or you all have to leave. And part of that was also all of his kids were like friends with like the pastor's kids and stuff like that. And so they got divorced. And then Cheryl married him like almost immediately, like almost as soon as the papers were dry. And then like a little bit of time passed, and then she brought Maureen back in, and Maureen was like fine with it because this was all supposed to be some like allegory of um like God's relationship with the church and God's relationship with us. And like there was some mention of like some stuff going on in like some of the Old Testament books um that like somehow had to do with some of it. Um, and then later on, she's still married to Pete, but then she's bringing this other guy from somewhere, I think he was from New Mexico. And like, again, because like part of what she was trying to say is that the church as a whole, not us, but just, you know, people who say that they're God's people are actually all whores and like, you know, basically cheating on God. So she's going to cheat on God and she's going to cheat on Pete and marry this other guy. And and there's again some stuff that you can also hear in the episodes on the opportunist that I wasn't really privy to, that had to do with like that guy, um, like at one point, I guess, almost killed her ex and stuff like that. Um, and so, and that was just one of, you know, many like, you know, I mean, not political necessarily, but like in the scheme of a church, you know, just kind of like all these power imbalances and like, and displays of power, you know.
And this entire time, you're struggling with a mental illness that you're not getting any support for,
Mm-hmm,
which really does it's the cause of your spiraling with behavior, with addiction, and Cheryl's answers to how you support your child through that is just completely the wrong advice. And I'm sure that with your therapist you must have talked through a lot about how everything was exacerbating everything.
yeah,
So that must have been a really exhausting and confusing, difficult, and as you said, lonely time.
yeah.
Was there a point where, I mean, you've talked about Jeannie and the librarian. Woo, yes, to those people who are like, hey, maybe we should read some literature or go and experience a different group and just see what if we think that this is okay and normal, what is happening,
Mm-hmm.
or typical what is happening in this other church. Was there anybody else outside of the group that you were able to establish a friendship or a connection with that helped you really separate from the church finally, and support you through your difficulties?
So, when I was a junior, I started going to Running Start, which is where you can go to the community college while you're still in high school. And so I was able to meet some friends there. Um, uh, and one of them, she's actually still one of my best friends. I met her not even at the school. We were both going to the school, never in any of the same classes, but I met her on uh, the bus, like the public transportation. Um, and I still tell her about like I remember her wearing her like iconic bowler hat and just um yeah, I knew we were gonna be friends. And yeah, she never so much, it was never like overt, like you need to get out. There was definitely times where we talked about it. But she definitely just more was just a supportive friend of like, yeah, your parents suck. Like, um, and definitely was a refuge for me. I would go over to her house a lot. Um, and and so with going to Running Start, it both helped and hindered my high school experience overall. And I ended up um uh middle of my senior year, um the trailer died. And when I say died, I mean like it was the way it like worked and ran, and like I could like plug in electronics and stuff, was it was plugged in by one main like extension cord to one of our outbuildings. And I guess I just overloaded it because I heard a big pop, and then everything went dark and quiet. And I go out and the extension cord is like melted. And so I went to the house and knocked on the door because, of course, the door is locked. And um, I had a room in the house the whole time, um, which they also, I will give them a little bit that when my grandparents lived there, the room that I had was called the back room or spare room. But that's what it always got called after that, too. They never called it mine. And so the night that happened, um, he let me come in. And by that point, I had just been in the trailer nonstop. At first, it was like a punishment. And like, you know, if you're on good behavior for a certain amount of days, you can come back into your room. But then by this time, I'm 18, and I had literally just turned 18 like 10 days prior. And so I go in and the bed is covered in unfolded clothes because that just became the dumping spot for, you know, when they did laundry. And so I had to shove stuff over, and I slept. It was probably, you know, middle of the night, so slept. And I wake up because also like I don't have any of my stuff set up in the room. And so I didn't have my alarm clock. And I wake up to my dad throwing, I think it was like a package of like menstrual pads that was like on the floor or something, but like throwing them at me and saying, if you don't get on the bus, you can't come home tonight. And I missed the bus. And my grandpa lived in a little house that we had like built next door. And so I asked him to take me to school. And I get there and I'm like crying to the guidance counselor. And she's like, he didn't mean it. Let's call him. And she puts him on speakerphone. He's like, I meant it. And so I had to go live with another friend, who was, their family was really helpful throughout like my teenage years. I don't talk to them much anymore, which is kind of a bummer. I really liked her a lot. Um, but so I stayed with them for a little bit, and then I got into transitional living through Northwest Youth Services. And I got my GED before everybody in my class graduated. Like graduation's in June, and I got my GED certificate in the mail in May. Um, and That's also kind of when a lot of other risk-taking behaviors kind of took off in my life. Um, but another person that was kind of there throughout, and I actually saw her um, up until September of 21, but was my therapist, Liz. And I started seeing her February of 2005 and saw her until September of 2021. Off and on a little bit. There was a couple years where like when I was in Job Corps and then my insurance was weird for a little bit. Um, she made me want to be a licensed mental health counselor. Um, like, and specifically like what I started with her for was dialectical behavior therapy. And that's what I want to teach other people. Um, yeah. And like there was an element of like there were certain times where there wasn't a whole lot she could do besides like support me and like, you know, be that person that like, you know, obviously as a therapist you can't be of full support like a family friend type of thing. But yeah, she she turned me on to my favorite artist, and she's still my favorite artist. Of all the music I listen to, she's the only one I have a tattoo for, which is Ani DeFranco. She's an indie folk rock artist that has a huge lesbian following, surprise, surprise. um, and I think it's really funny that out of all the music that my parents either were or were not okay with me listening to, which, first of all, they never listened to it themselves to know, but my mom bought me tickets for my 19th birthday to see her when she came to Western Washington University here. And I'm like, had you actually like listened to her lyrics and known that Liz told me about her as a subtle FU to you guys, I don't think you'd buy me tickets.
It's strange hearing about your family dynamic because it's almost as if there's a cultic family environment, abusive and neglectful, but also your parents are buying you concert tickets and they still talk to you even though there's shunning
Yeah,
practices in the church. It's very, very strange, isn't it?
it's very strange, and it's very hard for me even now, because especially like with the thing that happened last year when my mom, and it was mostly my mom. I don't talk to my dad a whole lot. Not that like, just, I mean, he's always been a man of few words, and also, pretty domineering for the most part. The last several years, even though they don't agree with a lot of the stuff in my life, um, I feel like I could tell that he was trying to apologize without saying it. Um, Especially once I got sober, um, and they saw like the changes that I was trying to make to my life, regardless of anything else that they were not doing. Um, they were more willing to help me out when I needed it. Um, and you know, more willing to just, talk to me about different stuff in general. But yeah, but when the thing happened where they said they weren't gonna come, which didn't surprise me. Like I mean, I'm always gonna hold out hope that maybe they'll finally accept me and whatever. But um, you know, they just, especially once they moved to the South, which is just kind of conservative by default. Um, they just really dug into those things. What's really funny is over the years, they, like, politically speaking, they didn't vote necessarily based on like the morals and values and beliefs that you would think, because they voted for Obama both times, and then they voted for Trump. And like, they, again, like, they never were like pro gay, but they were never like severely anti gay. But then, you know, in the years after, Trump and all that stuff, and moving to the South and just becoming increasingly more conservative. Also, my mom is a nurse and is anti vaccines, which I don't know how that happened. Um, yeah, I held out hope, but I wasn't surprised. And so I tried to not talk to them. But again, me being the person I am, and also like something that I've been talking about with my therapist, which I have a new one now, who was suggested by Liz, and Liz suggested me to her, and Liz was the only reason she took me on because she was closed otherwise. Um, uh, Everybody has that like inherent like need to have a connection with their like caregiver, their primary caregiver. And so, and especially like of the two of them, that's my mom, because like I was her firstborn. I was with her, even though it was only a year and a half, but like when she divorced my biological dad and all that stuff. So there really was and still is like a really strong bond between her and I. And honestly, a big part of it is, I think that some of the stuff that I've talked about in me is definitely in her, as far as she's really just taken on the role of the dutiful, subservient Christian wife. Um, and I like to think at one point she saw herself as, I'm surprised I haven't done this to this point, but I make movie references a lot. But My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the mom says the man may be the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the man any way she wants. And I'd like to think that my mom saw herself as that at one point. Um, but I think she's definitely kind of lost herself. And so now she's kind of um, given into the tendency that I know I used to have, but I became aware of it. And so I actively work against it, which is kind of just being the chameleon, not really having any beliefs of my own. I just kind of go along with whatever anybody else thinks. Which I definitely had that in the cult, but then also I had that for a long time outside of it, like when I got out and like trying to find myself. And for me, that stems from some of my, mental health issues. I don't know so much if she has those or if it's just more, you know, something else. But
At some point in the timeline of the Oneness Foundation, there's a significant event that happens that sparks the launch of a new branch of the Oneness Foundation. And I
yeah.
just wondered if you could talk the listeners through that whole saga.
So everybody had pets, and they had like started doing some volunteering, because for a while we were expected to do classes, and it was usually classes taught by other people in the congregation, but everybody had to do something. And so some of that people would go and work at like soup kitchens and animal shelters. And the pastor got a cat from one of the animal shelters, and her name was Eva, and then she died. And like it threw Cheryl into a tailspin. And she like immediately she decided, but of course God decided, right? Um, that they were going to start a cat adoption agency, and they were going to call it Eva's Eden. Um, and um, Very quickly, it was brought to light, quote unquote, that you know, cats were divine beings, that the Egyptians were right to worship cats. Um, that's where the Bastet logo for the Eva's Eden comes from. Um, there's a minute where I thought Eva was a Sphinx cat, and she wasn't. I think she was like a Russian blue or something. She was fluffy and gray and like, okay. So it was definitely like she was trying to incorporate the Egyptian mythology more than actually immortalize her cat. Um, and then of course worked in that like we're the chosen people, and so the cats are going to transform and like ferry the souls of the 144,000 in the end times. And so with that, they started the agency and had it in the basement of the Masonic temple. And everybody in the congregation was expected to foster these cats. And they were saving cats by the truckload from places like the Pasco shelter down south here. Um, um, they were targeting like kill shelters. Um, and yeah, just but literally by the truckload. And there was the most people that went there at any one time, I think, was maybe like 200. And like I'm probably overestimating. Um, and at one time, I know other people had upwards of like 30, 40 cats. My parents, when they left, had 18.
Oh
Um,
gosh, 18 cats. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
Well, and some of those at one time or another, when I was, right when we moved to that house when I was like 12, 13, my dad brought home a cat. And ever since then, they kind of proliferated because like it's really hard to catch a cat after she's weaned the kittens, but before she goes in heat again. Um, so we did have a good number that at some point or another were ours and not like for the adoption agency, but a good number of them were for the adoption agency. Um, and
So
actually,
you're living on a farm at this point. So you'd
yeah,
mentioned in your writing to me that it wasn't sort of like a hoarder's situation where there wasn't enough
yeah,
space or
mhm,
enough equipment to take
right,
care of the cats correctly. And it's great that so many cats are being saved, so many kittens are being saved,
mhm,
that kill shelters are being targeted. It's the
yeah,
belief system
yeah,
around the
mhm,
reasoning for saving those cats
right,
that's really quite strange, isn't it?
yeah. Well, and especially because like on top of those beliefs, like, and again, like it's great for the cats, but they were basically like the cats ate before anyone else in the house, like even the people's kids. Like most of the people in the congregation had young children, or at least like preteens and teenagers. Like I and a couple of the um pastor's kids were like the oldest people. Most people had like children, and like, but the cats had to eat first. And some of the congregation, I I remember like we were never well off. We were never like poverty level. I mean, but like the middle class doesn't really exist. But we were like, if it did, we were like lower middle class. But like there were people that were in poverty, and not just that, but had like sick children that were allergic to cats and still were expected to have cats. Um, and like severely chastised if they weren't able to take care of them.
Would
Um,
Cheryl like introduce cats to like services and have them just sort of around? Because some of the things that I've read on the internet about this group is that you could go and visit, and people would say it was really strange because it was sort of like a public facing um a a public front face for the destructive group that was running in the background.
mhm.
Um, so it's interesting to hear how it came to be from your perspective, but I'm just wondering what may have made people recognize that it was just all a bit strange.
I think partly just like, especially if you went more than once, you kind of realize that this adoption agency was in the basement of church. Um, and I don't know, just kind of the the kind of attitude you would get from the people that, the congregation people that were working there and like helping you adopt, because like you they had like a screening process. It was really like not hard to adopt, but like they wanted it was under the guise of like making sure you were a good home, but it was really like sussing out. And I think it was supposed to be like for later on down the road, and then it just didn't end up happening in most cases. But like if you would be another good addition to the congregation.
So
So
it's a quick way to find out people's financial status, I guess, if
that
they,
too.
you
Yeah.
know, asking questions around like, can you financially support the adoption of this creature?
Yeah. Right.
And they're like, yeah, we make this much money.
Hmm.
And also personal contact details and things.
Yeah.
Wow. And the cat adoption agency, Eva's Eden, it's not in operation anymore.
No, so that was kind of their like screw up, at least like specifically like telling people like me that they were leaving behind, that the church disbanded and that the pastor moved to Scotland, was when they reestablished Eva's Eden over there. Um, because for one thing, it ended up that, we found out a lot of who moved over there, including that Cheryl Ruthven lives in Columbia, Tennessee with everybody else. Everybody else lives within like 50 miles of each other. But so they reestablished for a while. And then in 2016, when Rachel went on the Life After God podcast, and several people that started a Facebook page called Is There a Cult in Columbia, Tennessee, which are friends and family of people that are in it or that have gotten out. They asked someone um, from a Nashville paper um, to do an article on them. And they they had been kind of saying similar things. I don't know if they ever got um, asked to comment on anything when they were over here. But I know that they'd been saying a lot of similar things up to different people about like, we're going to have to contact the FBI or lawyers or whatever. Um, and then literally the next day, everything was gone. All of their internet presence, um, and the cat adoption agency just didn't exist anymore. And so now the congregation is left with all of these cats that they're fostering. So, and like, my parents can't really explain it to me without telling me that the church still exists and like their whole belief system still exists, but they're still saving cats from the shelters with nowhere to put them, like nowhere to adopt them out. So my parents have like 35 or 40 cats now. And again, they live on another farm with a good amount of space, and some of the cats are indoor, outdoor, both, based on their like, how much care they need and stuff. But I mean, the whole house basically is devoted. They have like, it started out they had a cat room, and now basically they have their room, and then the rest of the house is cats.
Oh my goodness. I don't even know how you could manage like a handful, let
Right.
alone a
It's
truckload.
hard enough for me
Oh
to have
my
two.
goodness.
Like,
The
especially
thing,
because
like,
one of them is so old and I have to give him meds every day and feed him a certain way at night. Like, I can't imagine.
there's so many cats. How do you, I just logistically, like, making sure that they are not all doubling, tripling, multiplying by the tenfold
Well, they
is
that's a
a
that's a big
task on its
thing.
own.
That's a big thing on the front end. They're very big on making sure that everybody's fixed and chipped. So
Cheryl's really dug herself into a hole with this part of the belief system, because even though the adoption agency doesn't exist anymore, the belief system around revering cats, keeping cats, saving cats, has really ended up with everybody having dozens and dozens and dozens of cats.
yeah,
And you actually have one of those cats.
I do. Yeah, it was relatively soon after they started it. Um, I had just gotten back from Job Corps, and I moved into my first ever apartment on my own. And for my 21st birthday, they adopted one of the cats for me and gave me the cat. And it was one that they had already been fostering, and they specifically picked him because they kind of thought we would vibe.
Did
His name
your
is,
parents?
yeah, his name is Ferdinand. He's named after Ferdinand the Bull, because he's definitely I was gonna say gentle giant. He's not a giant by any means, especially he's so old, he's underweight now. Um, but he's always been kind of a loner, um, but just very sweet. Out of all of the cats that I've had, both another one here and then with different partners and stuff, and also a lot of the cats that they've had, he like he doesn't come and cuddle with me on my own, but he lets me pick him up. Um, and and I kept the name. That was the name they gave him, and I was like, it's very fitting. So also it's kind of an old man name, and he's been an old man since I got him at 3 years old. So just very like he's a tabby, and he meows a lot, but it sounds very like get off my lawn.
And Ferdinand's going to be celebrating his 15th birthday on the week that this episode airs. So happy
Mhm.
birthday, Ferdinand.
Yeah.
So once you managed to break away from the group,
Mhm.
with maybe some help from the group moving to a different
Yeah.
part of the country, um, and you said that you began researching cults. What were your major sort of connections at that time, reading literature about destructive movements and realizing that you may have been part of one?
So I actually did that research way before I got out. I started doing that research when I started high school, when I was like 14, 15. And I didn't officially get out until I was 18. Um, and then even then, there was a couple times where I visited, um, and sort of like I can tell that they were trying to get me to come back. Um, and then yeah, officially when they left in 2013. But yeah, some of the things that I really noticed were the love bombing was one that I really connected with. Um, Also, like just a lot of the control tactics that I could, really tell after the fact. Um, the fear and the intimidation, for instance, um, we were told that if we left or if we spoke out, specifically about Cheryl, about the prophet, or like said that she wasn't a real prophet or anything like that, um, we would go insane, or we would get cancer, or fall into financial ruin. Um, uh, some, and then the go to hell was, it always went back and forth. She talked about Sheol a lot, which is, an Old Testament word for hell. But like looking back on it now, I don't so much think, especially towards the end, that they actually believed in like what some people are brought up with, the fire and brimstone type thing. Um, but again, things like um well, for instance, what I did, because like I was at the behest of my parents, but like there were several times both what I've talked about and others were like, I felt it upon myself that I would go and like tell her things, um, like basically like confession. Um, and there were times where I and other people did that, and she would have us say it like in front of people. Um, and just very much like she wasn't a pastor in the sense of like other churches. It was very much like, especially looking back on it now, like she was the one we were worshiping. Um, and like her word, which of course, like we were told was God's word, was like the be all end all. Um, so including like the decisions she made, which again were because of God telling her stuff. So
So the group still exists. It's functioning out of Tennessee currently, and the cats are still a big part of the more recent
mhm.
beliefs that have been introduced to the group. Um, your parents are still actively a part of the the movement, and
As is my sister.
right, okay. So really, you have been forced really to grow up much faster than you should have done. Really struggled pretty much alone through ill mental health, um, and all of the additional struggles that come with not having the correct support around a diagnosis or
Hmm.
management of ill mental health.
Hmm.
So there's a level of resilience there that you've had to create. Um,
Hmm.
I used to work with young carers who care 6 to 18-year-olds that care for somebody else in the home.
Hmm.
And people always used to say, wow, aren't those kids so resilient? Like it was a good thing. Of course,
Hmm.
it's great to be resilient if
Yeah.
if you have to be, but kids shouldn't
Hmm.
have to be
Right.
resilient in the first place. They shouldn't have to be put in a position where they have to become resilient in order to manage their lives, in order to survive and thrive. So
Yeah.
you've really been placed in a position where you finish school early, you're taking extra classes, you're excelling at things that you do despite all of these extra added difficulties that you have. Your parents then up and leave, even though you've basically lived without them for your whole teenage life onwards anyway. And now you are living with Ferdinand and your other cat. Um, I just think that's an astonishing journey that you've been able to kind of almost compartmentalize everything in order to make sure that you can take care of yourself, which of course you never should have had to do.
Yeah. There were a lot of ups and downs between then and now too. I When they left, was kind of the catalyst for me finding out that I was bipolar. Um, because I'd kind of already been going manic before then, but that was kind of the um, the kickstart to the main thing. Because not knowing that I was, we didn't know what to look for, and I'd also just switched to a new therapist and a new psychiatrist because of them leaving. I was losing insurance and stuff, and so I ended up having a psychotic break and having legal issues and stuff like that. And also during that time that because it my overall thing lasted for almost a year. It lasted between 9 and 10 months. Um, and during that time, I alienated a lot of my neighbors to the point where I had a lease violation and lost my apartment. And then I ended up homeless for 4 years.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and so I was in shelters for most of that time. And then I was able to get on public housing. And right before I got in public housing is when I finally got into recovery. Um, I do a couple of different 12-step programs. I'm not just bisexual, I'm bisteptual. Um, but and I started going back to school. I actually started going back to school while I was in some of the shelters, and I got a degree from the local technical college. And then I started going back to school for my psychology degree in like 2018, I believe. And yeah, I things have, you know, been off and on, kind of good and bad, but good for the most part, especially since I've been able to, you know, get my feet under me. Getting sober was a big thing. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I would not have in my life if I hadn't gotten sober. I refound my spirituality, which is still really ever evolving. It's kind of funny, speaking of all of her eclectic pick and choose, I
I
kind
was
of do
thinking
this,
this
I
earlier.
kind of do the same thing. But I also practice and it harm none, do what you will, which includes like not, screwing with people's minds.
Well, I
Um,
mean, do you have like a building where you gather people together and
I
put
don't.
put, put
I do
those
stuff by
beliefs onto
myself.
others? Yeah,
So
I think, I mean, I did have that thought earlier about the different, and I think that that's okay.
yeah,
It's your, it's your individual right
right.
to
Yeah,
explore and express. Of course, it's when it starts to be put onto others in a coercive
hmm,
manner that it's
yeah,
not okay. So that's great. And I was also going to
yeah.
ask, what star sign do you think I am?
Ooh, I want to. At the very least, I think you're either an air or an earth sign.
I
Um,
don't even know what my star sign is, like
so
element wise.
there's four elements, right? So like there's three for each element. So of those, you would either be a
Oh, I do know. I think I do know.
yeah,
Um, I'm
but
an Aries.
no way.
Yeah, but I do think that my podcast self and me as
Okay.
Casey are
Yeah.
two very different people. So yeah.
And
Um
I'm a big proponent of the big three is a much better picture of a person. So big three being the sun, the moon, and the rising. Um, because I've talked to a lot of people that don't necessarily vibe with their sun sign is like fully, but when you talk about um your sun sign being your base personality, your moon sign being how you see yourself and like your inner emotional state, and then your rising sign being like what you present to other people, and like kind of the mask that you wear in the world and like how other people see you, that gives a lot more of a fuller picture in my opinion, because I'm a Sagittarius sun, and one of the main things that I've never really vibed with is like that's the like, you know, free spirit, travel all over the place, which like that'd be nice, but like also I just I don't know. It's hard for me to want to get out of here at some point, but like I don't know. And so,
Stability and
yeah.
routine are very important,
And
aren't
that's, I
they?
mean, that's just a very important thing. Just, yeah. And because also, like, star signs, they're great, but like, then life experience, really informs a lot of how you live in the world. Because I also, I practice divination and stuff like that, but none of those things are set in stone ever. And you can, like, well, this is what would either happen if you go on this trajectory, so then you could make these other decisions that won't let that happen, or it's like, here's different options, you know and so in the same way, yeah, so Sagittarius sun, Aries moon, Virgo rising. And so, like, and when I tell people that, like, I'm very, because those are, and two fire and a earth. And so, like, I'm a very, like, I'm an extroverted, like very passionate person, but also, like, and up until more recently, when I got some of my more visible tattoos and piercings, people, they can see that I put off, like, I'm pretty put together. And that's definitely an earth quality and a Virgo quality. And I definitely have the, like, I like making lists and I like having everything in my calendar and stuff like that. Um, but when it really comes down to it, like, you know, just, and it's more for, like, with my friends. If someone messes with my friends, you better watch out. So,
There comes the fieriness, I
yeah.
suppose. So a really a really tumultuous journey through adolescence into adulthood.
Hmm.
Um and you are in a pretty incredible place right now. But it's been a very long journey to get to that point. I think it's amazing that you are 5, 6 years in recovery.
A little over 6. With
Wow,
a
that's
I had a small blip when my parents told me they weren't coming. Um, but what I've told everybody else that I've ever met in recovery that's had relapses, I didn't lose all the stuff that I learned and all of the progress that I've made in my life by slipping up.
yeah. And that's the
And
importance of terminology, isn't it? Because you might
yeah.
hear somebody say that they're X years sober, but
Hmm.
I think people will always be in recovery.
Yeah.
It's the same as individuals who are deconstructing their cultic experiences
Hmm.
and attempting recovery from trauma and abuse.
Yeah.
It's not something that has there's no end point to that. So
Yeah.
recovery is something that is a continuous
Hmm.
thing. So six
So
years
in
is
in continuous time, I have a little over 6 months. But being in recovery, I've been in recovery for 6 years. So
well, that brings us to the end of our conversation today. I just wanted to ask you if you have any advice that you would like to give to people who are also in dual recovery in the same way you are, recovering from addiction, but also recovering from abuse or trauma that they may have experienced in a cultic environment.
yeah, if anyone's able, like, therapy saved my life, but I also recognize that that's not always possible either. you know, the biggest one, especially, like, here in the United States, of, insurance and all that stuff. Also, like, depending on other life situations, it might not be safe if they're still either in that situation, or, a lot of us have a tendency, even if we're not in that environment, to seek out abusive people. Um, and even now, like, I'm still realizing stuff about myself. I've um more recently come to the realization that even though I got out of that and have done a lot of therapy and also am in recovery from drugs and alcohol, I gave that stuff up for people. So it's an ever going process. But I think just some other advice I would give, maybe not even advice, but just like the affirmation that it's not their fault. Um, Even if they were, adults that, found themselves in those situations and environments, like people preyed upon us, you know, um, and, in the same way of like any other kind of abuse or assault, like that is not your fault. And, you know, there's so many people like me and everyone else that's been on this podcast and all kinds of groups on Facebook and Reddit. Reddit is awesome. um, and, you know, there's so much support out there, even regardless of therapy, you know. Um, but I'm not a toxically positive person by any means. I'm definitely more of an optimist. Um, and so like things do eventually get better. Oh, no, I take that back. And it's a line that you hear in 12-step groups a lot. Um, that things may not necessarily get better, but they're gonna get different. Um, and healing is not linear. Um, you know, I mean, even just recently, I had bariatric surgery a little over a year ago. And because of that, I've had to alter so many meds and supplements and stuff. And I actually have had some like mental health episodes that haven't happened since the stuff in 2013. Um, And so it's been really interesting navigating that. Because then also in 2013, I wasn't sober and I wasn't on the right meds and stuff. So being in a different place has been really helpful. And I wouldn't be able to do that without all the support that I found through those groups, through the 12-step programs, my friends. And I'm an extrovert, so I do karaoke at least twice a week. So
Do you have a karaoke song?
right now it's been Give Me One Reason by Tracy Chapman or Slide by the Goo Goo Dolls.
I absolutely love Tracy Chapman. That's an awesome choice. I think that there are a couple of notable songs that people might choose before that one as well. So that's a really and when it comes to like activism and like empowering women, it's just Tracy Chapman's amazing. So yeah, big shout out to you, Tracy.
If they had more Ani DeFranco songs, most people only have like one. It's a good one.
It's a good one, but we could do with more. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know it's the middle of the night for you, and I'm so appreciative of your openness, your willingness to come in and share your experiences and talk about everything from the difficult family circumstances through to your journey of understanding your own diagnosis, and also everything that Cheryl has um, put into the world. I think that this episode is not being linear in the way
Mm.
that some episodes might unfold, but think that that's I think that just makes this a standalone conversation even more so. So
Yeah.
I am really, really thankful that we're able to have this conversation today, because in terms of divination, had any of your decisions been different, we might not be having this chat. So I'm really, really
Hmm.
thankful for that, and thankful to meet Ferdinand as well,
Yeah.
and think that there's a lot of there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from your story of strength, and I really look forward to the listeners being able to hear it. So thank you so much, Desi, and thank you for being a patron of the show as well. Your continued
Absolutely.
support of the podcast is don't even have the words to thank patrons ever. I'm just like, what can I say here? And it's just thank you, thank you, thank you. So I appreciate you and your time, and I will let you go and get some sleep.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you.
Take care, Desi. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.